Is it possible to change one's sexual orientation? Hi, my name is Mahla. I'm a clinical sexologist with a doctorate in human sexuality, and I'm from Eros Coaching. There's this big debate of nurture versus nature when it comes to one's sexual orientation. Are they born that way, or did they become that way? Did something happen to them, and that's why they are now turned off a certain gender and now going for the so-called wrong gender or the different gender? And it's very important to understand that a lot of people who are attracted to the same sex, or a lot of people who are attracted to people of a different gender, feel that they already had that inclination from a young age. So regardless of whether it's cultural, religious, parental, societal kind of influence, they already felt this way. And it's been documented about 90% of the population identify as heterosexual, which means you're attracted to somebody of the opposite gender. And historically, it's always been there. You want to argue this, but it's always been there, where people are attracted to people of the same gender, about 10% of the population. And there was a time in history when if you were attracted to somebody of the opposite gender, your partner, your husband, wife, there was something wrong with you, because marriage was an arrangement of that was decided because of the class that you are in. You keep the money in the family, and you marry your first cousins, and you marry your siblings, things like that. And there was a time in history where people who have sex with the same sex are actually perceived to be stronger, because you are receiving the energy of somebody who you consider your senior or your elder. And that is real love, because procreative sex is considered very carnal and animalistic. And so with history now, however, with more education, people are starting to understand more about this whole question of nurture versus nature. They're also understanding that the sexual orientation of someone is not necessarily a preference. It's not that they necessarily chose to be that. And it's important to cast not the first stone, to not judge people or not discriminate or hate people based on who they are, where they come from. And it's really important to understand that if somebody you know is gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, they may not have necessarily chosen to be in the minority. Anybody who is in the minority, as you know, would have experienced some form of discrimination. There are also people who identify as bisexual. This is when they are attracted to people of both sexes, male or female. And these people sometimes address themselves as gender neutral, which means that they don't look at people based on their gender. Some people say that they're gender fluid, which means that regardless of who it is, depending on what it is, what strikes their mood, then they would just go with that. That is not to say that these people are immoral or promiscuous. It also depends on the individual. Perhaps there are times in their lives when we have been promiscuous, and there are times that we did engage in sexual activity that perhaps we're not proud of, but it doesn't mean that we are a bad person, right? So regardless of one's sexual orientation, it doesn't mean that they don't have values, and that they don't bleed the same way as heterosexuals, and they don't feel and love deeply the same way that heterosexuals do. So I really want to address that. But having talked about all these things, and now talking about, is it possible to change your sexual orientation? There are people who evolve and realize as they get older, with being less caught up on social constructs and feeling more confident and more free to be themselves, that they start to realize that all these things are labels, and they realize that they become more gender open. And this doesn't mean that whatever that they had before was a lie. And there are also people who identify as a male who has sex with a male, or female who has sex with a female, but don't necessarily identify as gay or lesbian. So this might be something that they do periodically for fun. And so it's important to understand the difference between a preference, someone who does it for experimentation versus someone who does it as an orientation. So how will you know? You don't know. It's self-identified. And really, it shouldn't matter to you, because we all have lives. We have our needs, wants, desires. As long as we're not hurting anybody, why does it matter to you? Unless you're interested in a person, then of course you may want to ask what is their gender orientation, or what kind of people are they attracted to. Is it possible to change sexual orientation? There's this thing called reparative therapy in the US. It's very controversial, but a lot of studies and research has shown that it doesn't work. What it does is it makes people who are gay feel worse about themselves. It makes them feel that they cannot express their sexuality. And just because someone is not expressing their sexuality, meaning they're not being sexual with anybody, it doesn't mean that they're cured. So reparative therapy, if anything, actually does a really big number on their self-identity, their self-esteem, their self-confidence. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say to answer this question, is it possible to change one's sexual orientation? My answer is don't even go there. Don't even try. Respect people for who they are. So this is my answer. And if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, then you can always post below. And if you have comments that or questions that you feel shy to post, you can always email me at ask@eroscoaching.com. So I'm Martha, I'm a clinical sexologist, and I'm approaching this not from a religious point of view. And I want you to understand that true love means not hurting people.